Thank you for participating in the 9th Annual Black Star Film Festival. We would like to thank our funders and individual donors, as well as our network of producing and community partners. This panel is presented in partnership with NextDoc. The runtime for this panel is 60 minutes and will not include an audience Q&A. Please follow us on all social media platforms at Black Star Fest and use the hashtags BSFF20 and BlackStar20 SoLit. We hope you have a wonderful time during the 2020 Black Star Film Festival.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darian Henry. I'm the co-founder and co-director of Youth FX and NextDoc. NextDoc is a national/international year-long fellowship that's geared towards creating space, building equity, community, and providing resources and support for young, emerging documentary filmmakers of color. NextDoc is also a program of Youth FX, and Youth FX is a nonprofit-based organization in upstate New York. For more information, find us on Instagram at YouthFXFilm and NextDoc Film, or check out our website at nextdoc.org and youthfx.org. Before I pass it on to the rest of our panelists, I'd like to start by acknowledging the indigenous land that I am privileged to be living and breathing on, and the Haudenosaunee people of this region. I'd like to acknowledge the Black and Brown people who are tirelessly working, building, fighting, protecting, and dying on this land. I'd like to acknowledge those who cannot be here with us today due to mass incarceration, deportation, and all the intersections in between. And I'd like to acknowledge all of you who are here today with us. Thank you for being here. I'm gonna pass it to Brit, and then afterwards, and pass it to the next person.
Sionagad Ijtahioja, Brit Hensel Dawado. Jikatuag Jiawiya, Ale Chalagihi Ayethnikeli, Anisahon Digagia, Tosi Digega. Rodat Nilostan, Digong Antisk, Nigadane. So I just said, hi, my name is Brit Hensel. I hope y'all are well. I am a filmmaker from Tulsa. I belong to the Blue Clan, the Blue people, and I am calling in from my ancestral homelands, which is in Eastern Tennessee and North Carolina, Alabama, but I'm currently in Eastern Tennessee. So I'm really happy to be here with y'all, and I'm happy to be in this conversation. So thank you, Wado.
Hey everybody, I'm calling in from the lands of the folks from the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi tribes. I'm a documentary filmmaker and cinematographer originally from Miami that now call Chicago home, specifically telling stories about Black youth and Black elders.
Hello, everyone. I am calling in from Greenville, North Carolina, which is the ancestral home of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I would like to acknowledge and honor the nearby territories of honor the Lumbee tribe, the Kahari Intertribal Council, the Halawa Saponi tribe, the Meherrin tribe, and the Okinichi Band of the Saponi Nation of North Carolina, who are the past, present, and future caretakers of this land and the lands just nearby. I'm a documentary filmmaker and activist based out of both Greenville and Durham, focused specifically on youth activism and uplifting the work of
Hi, everyone. My name is Lan, and I am calling in from the Bay Area of California right now, and that is the ancestral lands of the Ramaytush, Ohlone, and Tamian tribes. And I also, of course, need to acknowledge the Tongva people of Southern California, because I was born and raised and spent the majority of my life in Long Beach, California.
All right. As a frame for the conversation, I just wanted to start off by emphasizing the intention behind the conversation. An integral part of our NextDoc Fellowship is the week-long in-person convening we hold with accepted fellows, presenting filmmakers, and other industry co-conspirators. So this conversation is basically in the vein of what we call kickbacks, where we literally just chill and get gritty on documentary as a framework and our place in it, outside of it, what we're doing about it, and what we hope to see. With that being said, there will be no Q&A at the end. Speaking for myself, though, I'm open to hearing from folks via my own social media up to a certain point. So definitely hit me up if you have any questions, and trolls are not welcome. All right, so let's get into it. I feel like it's important to acknowledge the present moment that we're all in right now during this really wild global pandemic. I feel like there's so much we could harp on about in this conversation today, but I think we're centering ourselves in our joy and happiness, which I personally feel is like equally as important as centering our sadness and our changes and our pain. Um, and this, I don't know, I feel like this right here feels groundbreaking to me. We're like 5 women, all under 30, Black, brown, dynamic, diverse, active in documentary. So I just want to start off like by having y'all shamelessly flex on us. Like, what have you been up to? I feel like in spite of the pandemic, y'all have been so active and so engaged in so many different ways. And I'm biased in saying this, but I feel like that attributes to us being women and being super resourceful. So what have y'all been up to? Tell us.
I can be on Leo energy and go. So I am a cinematographer, and I have been following the organization on the west side of Chicago for the past 2 years called 360 Nation. So I kind of have shifted this summer from like my filmmaking practice to really doing a lot of organizing, because at one point the city decided to stop, giving meals to families and young folks, in response to the uprising, and like the mayor feeling like it was unsafe for like children to go to their schools and like be able to pick up lunches. So I've been doing like a lot of meal distribution work on the west side of Chicago. Also, I just finished a 3-part docu-series with another Next Doc fellow, Ankur Singh, and you all can check that out at lastcall312.com. We follow closing businesses in Chicago on their last day of operation, because as a transplant, I think it's really important to like acknowledge my place in the ecosystem of the city, and acknowledge, folks in here and be able to like create video archive work for them through filmmaking. So that is kind of what I'm working on right now, and that'll be screening at the Chicago Park District Film Festival, and just like continuing to work on other projects and being in post-production on things. And, everyone's just next doc mentality is very much like find the resources where you can and collaborate with each other. I just finished post-production on a film about a Black lesbian elder that I had met in New York, which Cesar Martinez, who's a Next Doc fellow, edited. And I'm really excited about that. So it's a lot of like trying to nourish myself as an individual and also nourish myself as a filmmaker with like the community that we've created through Next Doc.
I'm a say, yeah.
No, so I'm a producer and sometimes a director for a television show called OCO, Voices of the Cherokee People. And I'm based out of Tulsa. That's where the one of the 3 bands of Cherokee, two of the 3 bands of Cherokee are out in eastern Oklahoma. So we have just been trying to finish a season of a show, which has been really difficult during the pandemic. Talking to filming with elders, or we haven't been able to do that, so we virtually stopped production. But we've been really resourceful and trying to figure out ways to continue to move forward and to tell these stories. So the whole show is around just centering Cherokee people, our voices, our history, our culture. So that's what we've been doing, and just continuing to try and be safe, but also make the show go. So, yeah.
Can pop in. So most of my work has been over the past couple months has been really honing in on youth and student activism. I have a documentary short that I worked on with 30 other students called Silence Sam, which is about the movement to remove UNC Chapel Hill's Confederate monument, Silence Sam, from campus. And earlier this summer in June, UNC decided to put out a statement saying that they believe Black Lives Matter, and basically erased all the work that student activists did in order to, change those building names and remove the Confederate monument. And so since June, I've been working, me and the Silent Sam film organizing team, we've been working with students at UNC to make sure that other students remember the stories of what happened to students, remember the police infiltrations and the boycotts that had to happen for the change that we now get to see. And outside of that, I am now executive producing 2 projects that are honing in on youth and student activism. One project is with Aztec, it's another Next Doc Fellow. It's focused on the movement to build the first statue to Matthew Gaines, who was one of the first Black senators, coming out of Texas, and unwrapping the history, the legacy of racism at Texas A&M. And the last project is also kind of rooted in Confederate monuments, this time focusing on Raleigh, North Carolina, and looking at the movement to remove Confederate monuments in Raleigh and how that links to the movement to get justice for the families of victims of police brutality. Yes, that's basically what I've been working on.
Hi, everyone. So I can share a little bit about what I have been working on. This winter, spring, and summer has been very heartbreaking for my work in documentary because I had just released my film in November, and my plan for these next couple of months was to tour the country sharing the film I made called Fighting for Family, which follows the tale of an Indigenous family from the tribes of Vietnam who were refugees settled in North Carolina, but are now once again separated by deportation. And it's a story that hits very near and dear to my heart as the child of Southeast Asian refugees myself. So the goal for this time period was to travel the country, and I had plans with community organizations and universities and even like elected officials to share this film to advocate for the abolishment of ICE and the reunification of families separated by deportation. However, because of the pandemic, that's no longer able to happen. And I have been able to do a couple of virtual screenings, which have been really beautiful in a lot of ways because it's allowed us to connect the family from the film who are based in Vietnam and in Raleigh, North Carolina, to connect with these communities without having to travel. And in some ways, that's been really beautiful. But in other ways, it's been challenging because many of the groups that were interested in doing the screenings had to quickly transition to doing mutual aid and providing really much needed relief to communities right now because of COVID-19. So many screenings have had to be canceled. So I've actually shifted a lot of my focus to educating and community organizing. So I teach ethnic studies at Cal State University, Long Beach. And I've been spending a lot of my time reaching out to youth and talking to youth about the current crisis with COVID-19, as well as the uprisings against police brutality. And just like really building youth power now. Right now, I think in times of crisis, there is a lot of opportunities for the right to take over and spread negative messages and tear us apart. But I think during times of crisis, there's also a really beautiful opportunity for us to come together and not just restore our world to what it was before, but to build something even better and even more beautiful. So I've been working on creating that narrative through my educating as well as through creating media for civic engagement work as well.
Word. Thank you so much. Thank y'all. I think for the next set of questions, like you all have alluded to it in your own way. Aside from our common connection through NextDoc, like another major defining factor between all of us is our deep connection and commitment to our communities. So can y'all individually just speak to the communities you are a part of and the role that community has played in your development and growth as nonfiction storytellers? I'm going to start with Kai.
Yeah, I think Next Stop happened and became like a real turning point in my life. Before the fellowship, I was working in network TV news and was just like kind of over it. I was just like, the same white stories are being produced, like these white older producers are really like out of touch, in my opinion, and aren't interested in producing the same type of stories that I was. And I essentially went to the Next Doc Fellowship, met everyone, and was like, yo, like, I think I'm ready to like quit my job and like transition and figure out freelancing and like building with people that like bring me joy and that I want to be around frequently. And that ended up just like really changing like my perspective on things. It's really nice to be able to like send someone a text and be like, hey, have you watched this doc? Like, what are you thinking about it? Or like, what's your process right now? Like, how are you building trust with your participant? How do you respond to the tough days when you don't want to go and film with your participant? Like, this past winter, I was working on a film about an elder, and I was at her home like 9 to 5 every day. And like that ends up taking a toll on you, like as a filmmaker. And I had to text like my community and be like, hey, like I think I need to take a day off. And they're like, you know, it's like that sometimes. And that ended up being a day where I like missed a scene, but you bounce back and you're able to talk to your community, and they're like, okay, how can you still convey that information in other ways in your film? To me, like, there's unfortunately like in every industry like a lot of goofies, but like Next Doc is not that at all. Like, it's a genuine place where I can be like, hey, Bao and our Darian, this is what's going on right now. Or like, you know, Jelena, Cesar, Daviana, these are people that have like colored films for me, like edited films for me, like well below their rate because they like care about projects. So it's been a process. So like Courtney and I were both in the 2018 cohort, and just thinking about like where I am now in community with like nonfiction filmmakers is so different from where I was 2 years ago. And like the level of like access and community that's just like growing and just like very authentic. And there's no question that like I can't ask anyone in this group. It can be like, hey, can you send me your budget? Hey, can you send me your deck? Hey, like, what's your relationship with XYZ funder? Is this person legit or non-legit? And it's also just like, unfortunately, so many frustrations in like being able to have folks that are a sound word really mean a lot to me. So yeah, Next Doc is my A1 ride or die nonfiction community, for real, for real.
Y'all really gonna make me choose everybody. Courtney.
I feel like that was just such a sweet beginning. It was such a sweet way to answer that question. I echo everything that Kai said. I think one thing that's been kind of interesting for me is I feel like my work kind of came from a little bit of a different place. Like my documentary work, it came specifically, like technically I was doing documentary work before Silent Sam, but I wasn't like really like doing documentary work. Like I wasn't dedicated to it until Silent Sam. And I feel like I think Silent Sam, like just the community of student activists, students of color, my friends who are around me so much at UNC, I think really just shaped the way that I view documentaries now. I feel like that urgency, like it just changes the way that I value things. I think in my documentary work, it kind of took me a long time since first creating Silent Sam and then releasing Silent Sam to film festivals and going through like the having more people know about Silent Sam, where I finally, like, at the end of it, kind of came to realize that as much as I appreciate every opportunity and like want Silent Sam to be seen by a lot of people, that the core purpose of my work is still was still to those student activists that we made it for. Still to the students of color, and that like even if I wasn't able to put words to it, that like those folks had just kind of like defined the value for me. That it was all about what served them. So I think that community, the next that community is very salient for me. And then also like just thinking about who I do work for, like I think part of the reason why the student activist community is just so salient for me is just because of also how much they poured into me. And so I feel like at this point, every piece of work that I do is kind of like in honor of all the work that was poured into me and all the love that was poured into me when I was when I was a student, when I was a student activist. Yeah.
I can share next, so you don't have to call on someone. So I am super thankful for Next Doc, and since y'all already shared about how wonderful the community is, I won't dive into that too much. But I think for me, my interest in nonfiction storytelling has a lot to do with my identity as the child of refugees, of Southeast Asian refugees, because in refugee communities, you lose a lot of documentation that folks who are not refugees or folks who haven't had their ancestries severed violently, you know, like through slavery or through genocide or through other systemic factors that tear apart families. When this happens, you lose your history. So for me, as someone who is the child of refugees from a war-torn country, torn apart by U.S. imperialism, it really called upon me to put together these histories that have been attempted to be rewritten. You know, like the U.S. rewrites the war as democracy coming into this very like jungle-ridden country to save the country from communism. But the way my family sees it is it was just Asian people living their life and minding their own business, and the US came and bombed us and tore our families apart, you know? So for me, it's like if we're not telling our stories, the people in power are going to be rewriting our histories and telling it in a way that's unjust. So, you know, from growing up and learning about the war in US history classes and through media and through very horrible Western depictions of the war in Southeast Asia, I was drawn to need to expose the hypocrisy of what was happening and who was telling the stories of my people. So I think this history plays a really large role in why I chose to do nonfiction storytelling. And I think also my role as a community organizer really shapes how I utilize nonfiction storytelling as well. I think in community organizing and in working towards social change, people don't often realize the impact of storytelling. So I think it is important to be strategic with the stories that we tell and the narratives that we create, because unfortunately the folks on the right do a really good job of telling a story that frames immigrants as criminals, that frame people as useless and really dehumanizing our people. They do a really good job of doing that. So if we're not creating stories that frame our people as beautiful, as joyous, as the kings and queens and gender non-binary royal people that we are, then the right is going to beat us to that, and they're going to be framing our people in a way that is unjust and unfair. So that is really what motivates me to be involved in this work.
Yeah, and mine actually very similar to Land's, why I started film. I think working in documentary film, for me as a Native person, especially as it comes to like our history, it's been totally rewritten and whitewashed, and so much so to the point that, you know, we're really digging out of a hole to try and make sure that we're accurately represented, and that our history is told in the way that it happened, at least from an Indigenous perspective. So the show OCO, Voices of the Cherokee People, it's a docu-series, and we get to highlight people of our community. And so having the ability to work within my community every day, I mean, the show wouldn't work if we didn't have Cherokee people to talk to. And so we're completely dependent on, like I said, working within the community. And it's probably the most rewarding part of my work, getting to tell our people's stories and to serve it up in a way to, where other people can learn more about who we are as people, what Cherokee values are, what our history is, because we're really pushing towards, representation really does matter. And, growing up when you don't ever see yourself or your culture accurately represented, or nothing that looks, similarly to you and what your perspective is and what your lived experience is. We're thinking about that, and we're working really hard to make sure that younger Cherokee people, in the next 7 generations are able to see that and see themselves on screen in an authentic and a real way. So community is huge for us.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. I feel like it's not controversial at this point to say the colonial enterprise that is traditional documentary and documenting your industry, like what we know of it, it's totally dying. Like, and coronavirus just like punched it even harder to that place. And I feel like I've just been low key astonished at all the different ways the historically and predominantly white institutions have been like working to remain relevant right now. Shade, no shade. But in centering us still in this conversation, can y'all individually speak to how you've been transcending some of the traditions we've been indoctrinated in through documentary? Like, for instance, I know all of you have been working tirelessly at just like reshaping how you build your team, how you build solidarity, like how you're building equity, and redistributing the wealth and the resources that you have gained, and just like the production as process. Like Courtney, I think of you in saying this, and just like the healing process and the movement through the production process. So I'm gonna start with you, and then we can kick it to everyone else.
Yeah, production as process. So I feel like this just kind of reminds me of just I think something I actually kind of talked with y'all a little bit, which is just the idea that like I feel like the most important work that Silent Sam accomplished wasn't necessarily the documentary that came after. I feel like it was the process through which we made the documentary. I think it like I remember like right after Silent Sam was made, I was just talking to one of our impact producers who was one of the main student activists. All of our impact producers are like some of the main student activists who were leading the movement during the 2016-2017 school year. And it was either like Maya or Michelle who just mentioned that they felt energized by like us making the documentary. And even thinking about myself, like I was a student activist before I did the Silent Sam documentary. The Silent Sam documentary came because I was really exhausted by the idea of all of us telling the same stories and knowing that eventually that we were all going to forget the stories of, what happened on our campus. And once we forgot the stories that, the university administration in 4 years would probably repeat the same things, the same little petty stuff. And nobody would know that happened in 2016 and 2017. But one of the impact producers said, they were saying that it inspired them to kind of keep going in a way that's not like how people usually think about inspiration, but in like in a deep way where they knew that they were being heard. Like even if the statue didn't come down, if we didn't see the outcome as early as we did, we knew that somebody heard us. And that because somebody heard us, something had changed. And so I think a lot about that, and just I just feel like that process of being able to tell your story can be in a way where you can feel like you don't have to tell it again, and then that is in part one of the most could be one of the most valuable parts of a documentary. And just one other thought that I've just been kind of thinking of. I feel like there's also like I kind of mentioned like I don't think documentary really like covers everything that like, documentary filmmakers of color end up doing with their work. Like I looked up the definition of documentary. I think it basically sounds something like short of like exploitation and I'm gonna observe. Like that's what documentary is. That's like the definition. But like we do so much more than that, and I feel like if at the end of a documentary you've only made a documentary, then you've done something wrong. Yeah. So that's just something that I've just been keeping in mind with the other projects moving forward.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna call on Lan next because I feel like you've been doing a lot of really important work with documentary, and I feel like when we first met, you were really adamant about not claiming to be a documentary filmmaker. But I wanna like hear you speak on just like how you've been using the form as a tool in like building movements and sharing these narratives that you speak about.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think so your first question really just like resonated with me because you had called documentary a colonial enterprise. And I just want to get that printed out as a poster and hang it up behind me. But it just really reminds me of why I was so hesitant to call myself a documentary filmmaker, and today still am a lot of times, just because of the way that I view documentary field. So I'm very thankful for Next Doc and other spaces that are working to actively shift the culture around documentary. But one story that I want to share is when I was in undergrad at I don't want to call out any universities, but when I was studying undergrad, I was studying journalism, and I was telling the story of this woman who happened to be houseless, and she was having issues with getting custody of her daughter. Her daughter was in foster care, and she had a lot of resources, and she felt ready to have her daughter back in her life despite being houseless. And she saw what university I went to and asked if I could provide any resources. And that my professor happened to be a journalism professor who had ties to the legal school, the law school. So I had reached out to him and we had an appointment, and I told him about this project that I was working on. Was not about houselessness. It was actually about thrift shopping, but the woman who was houseless happened to be thrift shopping. But then I befriended this woman, and I wanted to ask him for some connections to the law school. And he told me I remember his words very clearly. He said, "You are not a social worker, you are a journalist. This is not your job to be out here making these relationships with people and befriending them and helping them." In journalism, there's this view that you have to be disconnected from the communities that you report on. And I think in documentary filmmaking, they expect that of filmmakers too. They expect filmmakers to have an emotional disconnect from the stories that we're telling. But what does that mean? How can people of color be emotionally disconnected from telling stories of people of color? If that's the case, then the only people who can tell stories of people of color without feeling emotionally connected are white people. And that's why we see white people making documentaries about color all the time. I was pushed away from the journalism and documentary field because of that experience. And unfortunately, that wasn't my only experience where someone told me that I was crossing the line or I was too emotionally connected. Even people who looked like me have told me that, who were in the documentary field. So I've been so thankful to Next Doc and for mentors and fellow filmmakers who are also my mentors in this space for learning from all of you all. We all make films about our communities, and we are all emotionally tied to our communities. And I would argue that that emotional connection makes us tell better stories. There's no such thing as an objective filmmaker or an objective storyteller. I think objectivity is a lie that exists to uphold systems of oppression, whether that's white supremacy or homophobia or misogyny, that exists so that those of us who were oppressed you know, like the people in power can say, oh, like you're biased, so you can't tell that story. That story is invalid. That upholding of objectivity is there to silence us. So I am really excited about being in community with folks like you all who are fighting that and are telling our stories and just taking up space.
Yeah, I'm thinking just about like when the pandemic first started, right? And like everyone was very much like housebound, and like what filmmakers are actually living like walking distance from the people that they're documenting, and about like filmmakers who like fly into places where they don't have strong relationships with. Like I was, when it like became safe whatever at the beginning, maybe in like late March, was on a bike ride and like ran into my participant. Like that's not something every documentary filmmaker has like can do, because they're like not in strong of community with their participants. Like I can be going to the grocery store and I can see a young person who like I have taught in like a film course, and like that is really affirming to like visually always be running into people whose stories that I have told and like am in community with. And I was talking the other day over text with Danelia Razzo, who was at the 2019 Next Doc convening, just about the idea of like who gets to tell what stories, and really grappling with that. Because as a DP, especially in this moment, a Black one, like I have gotten an influx of emails from folks who are like, hey, like I want to talk, like I'm interested in you potentially shooting this thing. And I'm like, okay, great, like let's have a conversation. Like, why are you interested in telling the story? Like, what connection do you have to this community? And I had a call this week where an individual was just like, I don't have to explain this to you. And I was just like, oh, well, maybe this is not a relationship that we should go in moving forward. And just like, I think people are really surprised that younger filmmakers are asking these questions. Like, I would never want to be on a project in which I think like participants might be taking advantage of because of like the colonial structure that has existed in documentary, and just like being comfortable enough to be like, hey, the money is like not worth it. Like I'm a Black person. I would never want to be documenting another Black individual and think like, maybe the practices of like this producer or this director are not the greatest, you know? So just thinking about that type of stuff is something that's like really frequent. And I'm always interested in having conversations about who's telling the story, what type of relationship have they built with their participants. And Courtney, I definitely agree with you. If like the only thing that comes out of the relationship that you have with your participants is a film, then like what have you done? Is that what they also want? Like what are the participants interested in as well? I think is something that's like really important and what we need to discuss more. And like the idea that Lon, you had that professor who was like, you're not a social worker, like you should just leave the situation as it is just bogus. Like if I were to have resources to help, you know, the people that I'm documenting, like I am going to do that. That's me, Kai Thomas, as an individual. Like the organization that I've been documenting for the last 2 years, like I helped them to fundraise this summer when they needed to have more money to be able to do like the mutual aid work. And like, I didn't think twice about it, because it was like, okay, we are feeding folks who are hungry, who like parents have like lost their job. And yeah, I think it's just, you know, I could talk about this forever because unfortunately there's just so much work out there that's like not made under the best circumstances.
Yeah, you guys just said that really well, all of you. I'm in the same boat with all of you in the sense that, like, I found that just in my process, like, you're always starting with somebody who's the source, you know, like, and I found for me too personally that in becoming closer with her story I'm sharing, the product is better, you know, and it's more authentic, and that's continually like what I'm chasing towards as a documentary filmmaker and working on the docuseries. Just like wanting to tell the truth and like capture the essence of the person or whatever story I'm telling or working to try and tell, and that requires like an active collaboration between whoever it is you know we're talking about or telling the story with. And in all the films that I've done outside of OCO TV, I walked away with friends, and like that being the goal, and with like an authentic and a true perspective. That's how we make the world better. Like that's how we educate people, is like being able to encapsulate like the authenticity and the essence of that story. And so anytime, that's where I began, and I work towards the whole time, through like a production phase all the way to the end. But yeah, I agree totally with everything you guys said. Just nailed all that on the head. Smart ladies.
Thank you so much.
Can I
I
add one
mean,
question to
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna add one question to Kai's what Kai was talking about, asking people, and just add the idea of like, just sometimes people don't need a documentary. Like, I mean, I like documentaries are like helpful and things, but I think that's just like, that's been a well, sometimes they don't need a documentary yet. And so I feel like that's been like a question that I've been like asking people, like, just to, like, why a documentary right now? Like, is there a different part of the documentary process that we need to implement, a different skill from, being a documentary filmmaker that we can use before we decide that it's even a documentary?
When you say not a documentary yet, is it because you feel like the process is too much for that particular person?
Well, not so much that the process too. It's just more so just questioning, like, I guess it's like another goals, I think, for certain projects. So like thinking about in the eyes of God, like one of the things I was asking Aztec was just the idea of like, if they're raising the money for the Matthew Gaines statue now, do we want to focus on like production now, or do we want to focus on getting information out about Matthew Gaines? And just kind of like playing with that idea of like ultimately, like most conversations end up going back to the documentary is what we're gonna do. But just like I've just been getting used to the idea of like playing with form a little bit, and just questioning like, do you actually really want to do a documentary, or is there something else that we haven't thought of, or like, is it a gallery that we want to do? Is it an event? Is it volunteering that you really want to do right now? And still saying that like a documentary can always come, but sometimes there's like a different skill set that might be needed for the community right now, especially thinking about like this pandemic right now. Like during this pandemic, not everybody needs a documentary made of certain like stuff going on. There are like really important work being done, but just thinking about like even being in Greenville right now, like sometimes me personally, it might be better for me to go volunteer and make sure folks can eat before I can,
Word.
do that kind of work.
No, that's really
Yeah.
valid. And word.
I just wanted to respond
Brit,
really quick, Courtney.
okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
You can go. Okay, I just wanted to respond
go
really
ahead.
quick because, like, the idea of should we be making documentaries is so important, because documentaries a lot of times cost a lot of money, and when you watch these documentaries on Netflix, on PBS, on all these channels that a lot of times they give white men millions of dollars to make documentaries, and sometimes they make documentaries. The documentaries play at these like very fringe film festivals, and then that's done. Like that's what the $5 million goes to. And so for me, I really see documentary filmmaking and the finances that go into it that could be feeding a lot of people, that could be preventing a lot of people from dying. Like, is it worth it to be spending those precious resources on documentary? Like, that's a question that I think about a lot. And I think that, in my opinion, it really only is justifiable if the film is paired with impact producing. Like, are you making sure that the film gets to the communities that it's meant to be, that is supposed to be seeing it? Like, are you changing dominant narratives? Are you changing legislation? Are you changing the mindsets of people whose mindsets need to be changed? And I feel like if the answer is no, then maybe you shouldn't be taking that money.
That makes me think of right today, the article came out about the Criterion Channel, and the idea that I think it's between 5 to 8, that's the only number of like Black filmmakers that are like in this 1,000+ catalog. And I was texting back and forth with a friend, and I was like, honestly, I'd rather, if I was a filmmaker, like the hood DVD man selling my shit and being like, yo, have y'all seen that like Kai has a new doc out? Then like being able to go on Criterion and be like, oh, my thing is there. It's like connect with like the people who really F with you, and like even Black Star as an ecosystem. Like I tell people, like Black Star is the only film festival you're gonna go to where everybody's dancing on beat. Like I'm sorry, like it is like a us by us situation, and just like being able to continue to like uplift those places that truly want you, you know. And I think Next Stop does a really good job of that. Like there have been other fellowships, of course, that every single one of us have been involved in, but it's like this one is just on a different level, and like everyone is really thinking critically about the work and not trying to like, you know, enter these super white spaces and be like, pick me, choose me. It's like, no, we can create a self-determined model of documentary and also question the work of each other. Like I am not perfect in every sense in like the trajectory of my documentary career. I know there are things that I have done that now I would not do. And it's like being able to be accountable for those decisions and now be in community with folks who are like going to continue to keep me accountable, like in my practice and in my work. So.
No, all of that is so valid, so valid. And I feel like it just alludes to, like, as y'all were talking, and some of you touched on it, like Courtney, Len, like, I just want to shout out all the Next Doc fellows who are tuned in right now, because I feel like for me, y'all consistently challenge me and Bowen to expand like the way we think about documentary and just like all the possibilities that can come from it. Like we have fellows who are lawyers, who are writers, journalists, programmers, curators, activists, archivists, like, and I feel like in this new space that we've been creating for ourselves, in documentary, it's so important to identify like all the different modes that you can come at it from. And so like my next question, where we have a little bit of time left, but my next question, and Bound and I ask y'all this all the time, but what is your desired future for documentary? For yourself in documentary, for your community in documentary, for the industry? Like, what do you hope for? I'm gonna go with Brit. I'm gonna start with you.
I think that, you know, I am really working hard to like stay present, and I think that's one thing that's been really helpful for me, especially during this pandemic. And just we have a lot of first language speakers who are passing on right now, and we've actually lost 3 since the year began. And using, like, it's been really just motivating me to use what I can do, my skills, to continue to help our people like preserve the language that's being spoken and document that. And so we're working really hard to, like, that's where I'm really like these things that are passing on, because our elders are our knowledge keepers, and that's where my attention is kind of totally focused. But I just want to keep telling more Cherokee stories and giving more Indigenous people a voice. And for the first time in my life, I'm actually in a position to where all my work and has brought me to a place where I can help do that now. It's like we talked about this at our, our convening, and like actually getting in these spaces is half the battle, like, yeah, I want to do this and this is what I'm excited about. And, but like actually getting your foot in the door to like open it up and wedge it open for other people, more Native and Indigenous people, I'm hoping to, bring forward with us as we continue to shape stories. I just hope that we can be more POC people, BIPOC people can be the shapers of their own stories. And that's really where I'm envisioning, for all that future. So.
For me, it's definitely like helping to empower even younger filmmakers. Like for the past 2 summers, I have taught like middle school age students like documentary and like expose them to shorts and like the craft and have them just like have the idea in their head, and the concept of like creating their own personal and familial archive is something that's like really important. That I feel like, you know, being able to look at like years later what their experience was as a young person is really important. And continuing to document elders, like those are probably my biggest priorities right now as a filmmaker.
I think for me, one thing that I would like to grow in myself, and one thing that I'd like to challenge the documentary field to grow in, is to use our films not to highlight individuals, but to challenge systems. I think a lot of times, like I'll use my film as an example. My film, Fighting for Family, is about a family separated by deportation, and the man who was deported is formerly incarcerated, and he got deported because of his sentence. So I think when people make films like this, there's often a tendency to use this sense of like exceptionalism, like, oh, like this stereotype exists, but this one person is different. This person is special. We like this person, you know? So like in documentary filmmaking, it's very individualistic. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that, because through films, we get to know these people. Like in my film, we get to know this family and love this family, but sometimes these documentaries will give out this message like, this family is different. The other families are bad. We shouldn't abolish ICE. Just protect this one family. So I think my hope for documentary filmmaking is to stray away from this narrative of exceptionalism, but to challenge systems, like incarceration and ICE and policing. And rather than I think we can highlight individuals, but rather than making them seem exceptional, how can we expose the systems for what they really are?
Yeah, I second that. Second what everybody said. I feel like my documentary vision is very much so centered on healing. I kind of want to imagine a world where eventually, like, documentary form can just be so accessible that there can be just documentary cookouts where like families and people get together and make their own documentaries and just let that be like either like a using it as a form to create like healing and understanding and real like relationship building, or just as a pure form of like joy. Um, just yeah, that's what I'm like hoping for, and along with that, just kind of also like hoping for a little more like for PLC to be a little bit more independent from a lot of these white supremacist institutions in the documentary industry, and just, you know, not having to depend on okay, yeah, just I'll just leave it. I'll leave. I'll leave that. Y'all know what you know. Yeah. The healing, joy, and independence is what I'm hoping for.
When. So we have like a few little minutes left, and I have one last question. I couldn't help but ask this question. What would be a word of reassurance or advice you'd give to a young documentary filmmaker of color who's potentially watching this right now?
It takes time to build community, but once you have it and niggas are solid, it's irreplaceable.
I think my advice would be to be your true self. I just turned 25 yesterday, and I was reflecting about my age and thinking a lot about how, as a young person, I often like hide the fact that I'm a young person and try to move through life as a quote unquote adult, you know. But upon reflecting on my age, I think we should be empowered as young people. So to the young people out there, like, you are young and that is badass, you know, like don't pretend to be anything but who you actually are.
Yeah, I think I echo Lan in that that idea of the, like, your lived experience, like where you are right now, is like that's where you should operate from. You know, when moving forward with stories, like, you only know your own lived experience, and to get the most authentic story out, you can only tell one from your personal experience. Or also just like that your best a lot of times is good enough, and to be okay with where you are right now. and to not get like super caught up in, oh, I hope to be here someday. Like, well, you're here right now, so be in the moment and be present, and just learn everything that you can. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I feel like I would say just like in quotations what somebody told me, which was like, do it, just do it. Or maybe Nike said that. Okay, came from somewhere. Just I feel like like over my time of my youth, I feel like there's just I've gotten so many like mixed messages, like and part of those messages have been the idea of like waiting until you're older and waiting until you can like climb the ladder and be the CEO and start the business and all that other stuff. And so I guess my advice is like don't wait for any of that. Like it took me a while to realize, like within the like maybe the past couple months, I started realizing that the Black Panthers were young, that like our civil rights leaders were like 30. That there were all these people who were doing things like in their 20s, that her was like 22 or something. And I feel like when I started realizing that, it just motivated me more to want to tell young people, like, don't wait for all those steps. You can go out, you can tell your stories, you can get rooted, like, just do it.
No, for real. Thank y'all so much. For a few, like really quickly, what's next? Like what's happening next? What can people look for in the months to come, the weeks to come from y'all? I know on our end, we're in the midst of like organizing additional conversations. Like I feel like this is a precursor to more curated kickbacks. So please stay on the lookout for those via Nextdocs Instagram page and our Facebook page as well. But what do y'all have coming up that people can find you on? Kai, shout.
I just had a series that just dropped. So if you go to lastcall312.com, you can see the series that I made with Ankur Singh, who's another Next Doc fellow. And hopefully some other projects will be dropping soon. On Instagram is probably where I'm probably the most active on stories, is Aspire for Greatness, with the number 4 and the number 8 in there. So yeah, and tomorrow's my birthday, so that's what's ahead. Just past year. Yeah.
Happy birthday, y'all.
Yeah, happy birthday. Season 6 of the show that I've produced, I think like 6 episodes, and I've directed 3, and that is going to premiere in October, and you can find all those at oco.tv. So
I can go next. So these next couple of months, I'll be doing a lot of organizing for the election, working on getting progressive ballot initiatives passed. And in terms of documentary filmmaking, the film that I was talking about earlier, Fighting for Family, is going to be screening at a couple of film festivals. So you can find the film fightingforfamilyfilm.com.
And so for me, Silent Sam, we're still organizing some events, co-organizing events with students to highlight the BS that UNC is going through right now. And we also put the link on YouTube temporarily in response to UNC's Black Lives Matter statement. Other than that, there are the 2 projects that I'm working executive producing for, The Lost Cause and In the Eyes of God, is trying to get funding. We're in production, so if you want to help that, I'll be retweeting it from my account, which is at Simone Sees, SYMONESEES. And Silent Sam will be tweeting the temporary YouTube link.
Yes, women asking for you. We need it. Anybody who's y'all send some checks to Next Doc.
Thank y'all so much. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Black Star. Thank you, Mayori. Thank you, Farah. who's also a Next Talk Fellow. Shout out to you. Thank you so much.
I was saying, you're getting a lot of love on the Facebook as well. A lot of people are like asking for links, and sometimes our moderator is posting them and stuff.